Hello everyone. Today I am going to do a what I would call a sound sample, or sound samples of Gallien Krueger 1001RB Mark II amp, which is right now plugged into a 410 Neo cab, which is 4 ohms. So it's in biamp mode because I'm using the speak-on cable. And the reason why I'm doing this today is because I've noticed there is a demand for audio samples of amps so that people can get a better idea of how an amp may sound. Before I proceed, I'd just like to tell you today I'll be using my Ibanez Soundgear SR3005 bass. So you have to take into account whatever bass you use is going to affect your sound in the end. Also the types of string you use, and also a musician's technique will affect the sound of your amp, and of course the amp itself, based on your settings, the pre-EQ settings, the post-EQ. Basically every minute change you make on an amp will make a discernible difference to the sound, especially if you make a drastic change in your EQ, and even volume levels will certainly change the way your speakers will work. And then again, also you have to take into account the type of cabinet you're using. 410, if it's a 15, if it's the double 15, if you're using an 18, if you're using smaller speakers, larger speakers, the size of the cabinet, how the cabinet is designed, how it's made, if it's insulated, if it's not insulated. All these things are factors in sound reproduction when it comes to playing any instrument through electrical enhanced audio. So even the fact that the room that you're in also has a part to play in the sound of your amp. And that's why from stage to stage, from building to building, from venue to venue, you will find you'll be changing your settings on your amp because of the room acoustics. I should also mention at this time that I'll be doing some basic sound samples on the bass to give you an idea. I may throw in a few runs. It's not to demonstrate any skill or technique in that sense, but there will be skill and technique involved, of course. But it'll just to show you the kind of sampling as to the attack on the strings, the way the strings are played. But the main premise of this video is to allow you to see how the amp, through different changes, will give you an audio, the audio difference. Also keep in mind that I'm using a relatively expensive camera. However, the audio is going to only be as good as it can be replicated by this camera, and also the sound that you have on your end of your computer, whatever you're using to watch YouTube today, whether it be just 2 speakers, if it's headphones, if it's a set of speakers with a subwoofer, if it's a large set of speakers, a small set of speakers, everything changes the dynamic of the sound. So keep that in mind. This is just a general reference to give those people out there that would like to know a better idea of what this bass amp will sound like. Also remind you, every different musician, every different guitar, every different set of strings, yada yada yada, is going to change the dynamic of the sound. So with that, we'll proceed to the actual sound part of this video. Now, my personal settings on the bass guitar, basically I use my volume on my guitar full. The actual EQ part of the preamp of this guitar, by the way, this guitar has Bartolini bass pickups. The actual bass and treble control of the amp I keep generally at center, what they call the detent. My bass definitely stays at the detent, which is, if you were looking at the dial, it would be at 12 o'clock, or halfway the halfway to full position of being off and on, fully on. The treble, I do boost slightly above the center or detent, and sometimes I may even roll that back to detent to the center, but generally just a bit ahead on this bass. The mid-range part, there's two parts. There's a double stack knob. Basically what I do with this one, the lower knob I keep rolled right off, basically turned as I look at the guitar counterclockwise, and the actual top control I keep on the detent also, center. So basically I'm using a pretty basic sound of the amp, not boosting too much of anything, letting the actual guitar itself do the work, let the pickups do the work of the guitar, the body, the neck, the strings, everything, all in cooperation, basically doing all the work and not coloring the guitar too much, keeping it clean, keeping it simple. I also have my pickup that I use is the pickup by the bridge, which is the cleanest pickup down by the bridge. Now some people will roll to center to use both pickups, and it'll give you more of a more full range sound. It'll be deeper. And of course, if you roll to the neck pickup, you will get even more deep sound. My personal preference on stage and as a guitarist, as a bass guitarist, is to play as a bass should sound, but clean, not muddy, a bit of body to it, some presence, some edge, a bit of attack, some cleanliness, a little bit of everything, so that every note is as distinct as it should be without being overly expressed, I guess would be the word to use. Also, for the purposes of this demonstration, the actual horn section of the amp, which is in biamp mode because I'm using the speak on cable, I have the control on the back of this speaker cabinet at center also. So you will hear some hiss from the horn, which is natural. I can turn the tweeter control, of course, from the biamp section of the amp. But just for the purposes of this, what I'm trying to do here, it is set on center. So I can actually turn it off and still get lots of cleanliness from the amp, and I can also turn it up on bust. The horn section, that is. And so it's just a matter of preference. But for this thing right now, we will leave it on center. Okay, as you will note now, I just pulled it in a bit tighter. And what I will do is eventually I will close into the specific voice filtering part right over to the biamp section and omit the rest of what you're seeing in this video, so you'll see exactly what's going on with regard to the filter, the active equalization, and the biamp output. So so that way you'll see the subtle differences, and hopefully being 2 feet away from this amp, it won't be too loud, it won't be too distorted, it'll be replicated properly. Okay, it just so happens that other than the main volume of what we have now, other than the main volume, which is the input volume, this is the settings that I had at the last establishment that I played, which was the St. George's Legion. A nice building. It has a wonderful sound, a great place to play, because you don't have much trouble setting up the actual system. It almost works perfect right out of the box, basically. It's and you'll find some places will be different because of the actual construction of the building, what the materials inside the building are doing for your sound. Sometimes it's helpful, and sometimes it's very detrimental. So you'll look, the volume I have turned down to relatively off, basically, just enough to give you a little bit of oomph, I guess, when I do turn the bass on. The contours where I had it set, the voicing filter, you'll see that the treble and the high mids were boosted a fair bit, and the low and mid, the low mid I should say, is set pretty well center, and the bass was rolled off just a tiny bit off center. And I have the boost and the tweeter set nearly center. By turning the boost, it gives you a little bit more growl, a little bit more edge, and the actual woofer is set to 12 o'clock, and I have it, this selection right here, I have it set into 5-string mode. If I put it out, it'll be in 4-string, this bass being 5-string, I have it on 5. And I have the tweeter cut off and the woofer cut off. That's how I played last night. I'll just give you a sound sample. I'll give you the low B, and I'll give you a sample of the strings basically in the bass spectrum. This is the open B. That's not E note, that's the B note. This is the E. Your A note. Some harmonics. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the voicing filter off, the contour and the presence, and give you that sample, just a few notes. Open B. So you hear it's certainly a slight change. It's difficult to, probably for most, but some people will detect the sound. We'll turn this back to, we'll turn the presence clear up 100% and keep the contour on 12 o'clock. Now you'll notice that you'll hear a lot of string action. That's because obviously the horn I do have boosted to the center, but be ever mindful that when you're in the mix, even though it sounds some clacky, I guess would be the word, clickety or clackety, when you're in the mix, you have to have some amount of that noise in order to cut through the mix and be clear, but not losing your foundation of the actual bass notes and the mid-range. Okay, now I have everything except for the volume. Of course, the volume is still way down at probably only like 1, I guess. But all the other parts of the EQ here, the biamp section, the filtering section, the voice filtering section, and the equalization section is basically at 12 o'clock. Just going to make one slight adjustment here, maybe 2. Okay, that looks about 12 o'clock. This is everything set at 12, which you'll find anybody with a discerning ear, they will say everything set at center. That's usually what you'll hear with the Gallien Krueger. Sounds great right out the box, and everything beyond that just sweetens it, just makes it better or more to your taste. So here we go. Open B. Now you may notice it's lost its top edge, and that's why I kind of had the treble and the high mid boosted to give it that clarity. It may sound a bit noisy to some musicians, but when you're in a mix with a drummer and other musicians on stage, it comes in handy. I'd like to also mention that I use the direct out of the amp, which is phenomenal. It's great, but I do use it in preamp mode only. I found that post amp it was almost too clean for the system. I've used it once, and I think I should have swept a bit of the high off of the bass in the the mixer part of the main out front board. It might have been, when I was playing aggressively, with a bit of attack on the strings, it may have been a bit too much expression, or I should say the high end was more excited than it should have been, and maybe the mids and the lows, if they would have been brought up higher, basically a higher, more headroom, would have sounded great. But what happened is that it seemed like the high end, or the mid and high, got overexcited in that department. So I am now using a preamp. So okay, we have everything set at center, and now I'm going to just do some open E and turn the note, some of these pots off and on. So I'll turn up the guitar first, and okay, we're going to turn down the treble with the open E note. So you hear that hiss gone. Still relatively clean, would be great for practicing, but I would suggest that if you were playing in a live band, you just lost your clarity on stage. Okay, back to center. Now I'm just not hitting the strings too hard here. Let's turn it up all the way. Massive hiss, of course. You hear that aggressiveness now. That growl is really taking over there. Sweep that back to center, and now we do the high mid off, and we'll gradually roll that on. 1/4, 12 o'clock, and 3/4. Let's do a little sample. I didn't want to keep the treble up too high because it gets pretty raspy. Well, I'm just definitely hearing everything on the amp there. So we'll turn it down, back to center, and we'll go with the low mid now. We'll turn that off completely, and we'll do some notes for you. Open B. You hear the strings hitting the pickup. Like I say, when it's in the mix, you're going to need something other than being boomy, because you're not going to be able to distinguish the notes. That's trouble that many bassists will find. When they stand alone, it sounds nice and boomy. It's really kicking you in the backside. But when it comes to the mix, you have to be constantly referencing where you're to on the fretboard, because the notes are not distinguishable. So that would be my suggestion, to play as clean as possible without being raspy or too clanky. You'll know when you're in the mix. Actually, when you're playing is a good time to turn back and do some adjustments. Sometimes even rolling off the bass a bit, and the low mids could help. Let's try the bass fully off. Open B. I'll roll that back, and I'll turn it all the ways up. Open B with full bass. Got a nice punch. Really punchy now. Sounds nice, but then I would say, I would offer that once you're in the mix, you'd have to swing a bit more highs in order to hear it in a band application. Open B. Okay, let's swing that back off here. Okay, we're going to keep everything pretty well generally at center. Let's look at the boost here now. Turn the boost off, and of course you're going to lose everything, because remember now, this amp in biamp mode is actually using one amp, the 700 watt part, for the 4 10s in this cabinet, and generally any other speaker that you're going to be using, if it's in biamp mode, that's what will happen. And the tweeter, of course, is the tweeter amp. It's 50 watts, into 4 ohm, 25 or so into 8 ohm, which is barrels. It doesn't sound like much for a tweeter, but believe me, a tweeter can cut very easily through the mix with very little wattage. So we have the boost off, but we have to turn it on, of course, to get some signal. So we'll just, I'll give you an open E note here. And that's fully on. Open B. Some harmonics. Okay, now let's bring the boost back to center, and we'll turn the tweeter off. Turn the volume up first on the guitar. Now you hear the hiss has gone again because the actual amp that's running the tweeter section is pretty well off. But you'll notice it's still relatively clean in this application. On stage might be a different question. Open B. Let's roll some tweeter back in. Open E. And definitely give it more edge and more presence with the top end for sure. So the only thing we haven't done, I believe, is the actual full voicing filter, and of course the woofer. So we turn the voicing filter all the ways on. Not suggested that you do this, but then again it could be your preference based on your guitar and speakers that you're using and the actual room. You never know what can happen. Open B. Now I'm going to roll off some of the presence here. Roll it right off. Roll it on. Off. Same thing with the contour. Subtle difference, but in the mix, definitely in the mix, it certainly makes a difference. Let's look at the woofer now. Roll it fully on. Let's take it off and see what happens. Guess what? It's the same thing. You're turning off the basic system. So we'll turn that just slightly to 1/4 power, I guess. And we'll roll some on as we play. Open E. Here from the actual unit that is behind the amp. Some vibration or stuff here that I should have removed. Don't worry about that. We wouldn't be playing with that full woofer anyway. You're definitely going to get some vibration from bass, as you know. Okay, let's look at the woofer cut. Not a big deal. You may hear a difference. You can actually hear like a change in the actual sound of the amp without a note being played. But I'll hit open E and change it for you, on and off. Off, on, off. Subtle. The actual camera may not pick up the audio as clearly as what I may be hearing it, but it should be pretty good. We'll also do the tweeter cut. You'll hear the tweeter becoming pretty quiet. A note, open with the tweeter off and on. So you see it does clean up that some of that sound, that hissing noise, and trust me, hissing is not bad. If it's obnoxious, yes it is. But when it comes to playing bass, I could offer some lifelong experience and knowledge to you that playing boomy is great. It's gonna move the room. Is gonna give you that feel if you've got the proper system. But you're not going to be distinct. So you need to be really clean, actually, on stage. Once you get into the mix, it becomes very important to be clean without being too clean. Like I say, having too much highs, you can boost things it'll just drive things crazy. It'll cause a lot of havoc for the PA and for whoever's doing the sound. It could create a lot of work. But generally, when you're using an amp like this, everything on centers, and then you tweak from there, basically, based on the room acoustics, the kind of guitar you're playing, of course, but basically the room acoustics and what the sound is like. So that's the best I can do for you in giving you sound samples for the Gallien Krueger. I know that a lot of people are looking forward to listening to this, and I hope it has been of some help to those who are looking at buying Gallien Krueger. There's lots of great amps out there, and so this sound sample I hope turns out well. It sounds like a good replication of what it should be, and give you a better idea as to what exactly you're getting into when buying one of these amps. I certainly would highly recommend it, but like I say, you have to have a discipline when it comes to setting the amp, because it's really colorful. It is really, really colorful, and so you have a wide spectrum of sound. And also with this guitar, I find the Ibanez SR 3005 is also incredible when it comes to tonality and stuff like that. But I'm not in this now to be bragging up my own gear. I'm just trying to give people a reference as to what is out there, and specifically to this gear that I have today, and so you can have a listen and decide for yourself. I hope that's been helpful to you, and I'd like to thank you for listening, and have a great day.